History books often reduce the victims of Salem to mere names in a ledger, but before the world broke, they were the heartbeat of the village. They were farmers, mothers, and neighbors whose lives were defined by the steady, rhythmic cycle of the seasons, until that rhythm was shattered by a whisper. Today, we peel back the layers of these ordinary lives to see how quickly a peaceful existence can be dismantled when suspicion replaces trust. If you are watching this right now, I want to ask you something. How much of history do you think is actually true? Because what you are about to hear was never meant to reach you. These are the classified files, the buried evidence, and the forbidden stories that powerful forces spent decades trying to erase. If you are someone who refuses to accept the official story, you are in the right place. Subscribe to the Dark History Files and join thousands of truth seekers uncovering what history tried to hide. Welcome back. This is the Dark History Files, and today we expose a truth that was never meant to be told. The individuals ensnared in the Salem crisis emerged from every stratum of village life. Some tilled modest farms hemmed by stone and timber. Others managed households or served in established homes. A few held positions of status, their reputations forged through years of industry and faith. Despite their disparate lives, they were soon bound by a singular, tightening web of suspicion. Before this darkness, their world was defined by the sensory rhythms of Salem. They knew the resonance of wagon wheels on rutted tracks and the call of the meeting house bell. They breathed the scent of hearth smoke and freshly turned earth. Their lives centered on the practicalities of survival, food, season, and kin. These were the mundane cadences of rural existence, long before historical memory transformed them into icons of tragedy. Then, the climate shifted. Names once spoken in the context of daily business resurfaced in darker discourse. Familiar neighbors, the farmer, the widow, the servant, became focal points of speculation. This transition rarely occurred with sudden force. It manifested through incremental erosion. A reputation built over decades began to wither under the weight of whispers echoing across the village. In retrospect, it is tempting to view the accused solely as figures within a historical epic. Yet, they lived by personal benchmarks. They defined themselves as spouses, parents, and laborers, their identities anchored in service and community. This perspective demands a somber clarity. Before the machinery of court and controversy consumed them, they were ordinary souls passing through ordinary days, oblivious to the encroaching shadow that would irrevocably shatter their future. Among the accused were farmers bound to the relentless cycle of land and season. Their lives were defined by toil, planting fields, mending fences, and anticipating harvests at the mercy of an unforgiving climate. Success required endurance, not acclaim. Rooted in their soil for decades, their identities were inseparable from the boundaries they maintained. Before the crisis, their sole burden was the struggle to sustain their households against the encroaching winter. Others occupied more precarious stations. Widows navigated existence without the protection of a patriarch, demanding a resilience that often chafed against social norms. Managing property and securing resources rendered them outliers. While independence earned grudging respect, it frequently invited suspicion. In a community defined by rigid communal ties, those who deviated from the standard were inevitably marked by curiosity and misgiving. Servants and laborers stood equally vulnerable. Their days were dictated by the demands of those they served, tending livestock, preparing meals, and sustaining the village's infrastructure. Though essential, their social influence remained marginal. Their plight serves as a haunting reminder that the Salem Purge knew no hierarchy. Status, wealth, and vocation provided no sanctuary once the contagion of suspicion began its silent crawl. Some accused held reputations for unwavering piety and civic engagement. They were stalwarts of the meeting house, pillars of a community that appeared stable and upright. For those who knew them, reconciling these lives of service with the emerging charges was an agonizing cognitive dissonance. The chasm between established reputation and public accusation fractured the village's collective understanding, forcing neighbors to question the very fabric of their reality. When viewed as a whole, these lives reveal a community far more complex than history often records. The accused were not a monolith. They spanned every age, station, and circumstance. Their sole commonality was not a shared past, but the sudden, indiscriminate arrival of suspicion. By centering their humanity rather than their tragedy, a different Salem emerges. Not merely a story of hysteria, but a narrative of ordinary lives, routines, and relationships abruptly severed by forces they could neither foresee nor escape. For many of the accused, the most profound transformation was social. Bonds forged over years eroded in mere moments. A neighbor's casual greeting curdled into caution. Familiar encounters along village paths grew strained. Those who shared pews and daily labor now navigated a landscape of pervasive doubt. The accused remained unchanged, yet the collective perception of them was irrevocably altered. In a cloistered colonial society, reputation was the primary currency. Salem's inhabitants were bound by dense, intimate networks where every past grievance, act of kindness, and quirk of character was cataloged. Reputation dictated one's capacity for trust and cooperation. When accusations struck, they collided with these established legacies, plunging the community into a labyrinth of conflicting truths. Families suffered the collateral damage. An allegation against one member cast a pall over the entire household. Spouses and kin were tethered to a crisis they did not ignite, subjected to the scrutiny of neighbors. While the demands of survival forced the continuation of daily routines, these tasks were now performed under an encroaching shadow. Practical life grew burdensome when weighed against the suffocating pressure of public suspicion. The emotional toll was profound and varied. Some felt the numbing disbelief of the targeted. Others endured the caustic mix of fear, isolation, and resentment. While human responses differed, all faced the same existential threat: the destruction of their self-identity. The definitions of their lives, built upon years of labor and kinship, were suddenly supplanted by alien, alarming portrayals of their own character. This reality highlights the deeply personal nature of history. We often reduce the Salem crisis to cold statistics and legal archives, ignoring the individuals trapped within the record. They awoke each day haunted by the memory of their former selves. The dissonance between those memories and their new, hostile reality proved impossible to reconcile. As suspicion gripped Salem, the accused were forced to inhabit the void between the ordinary lives they knew and the sinister transformation imposed upon them by forces beyond their reach. The accused faced harrowing practical consequences as suspicion dismantled their lives. Daily duties remained, yet the stability of their existence withered. Farms languished, livestock went untended, and the once reliable rhythm of labor was severed by interrogations, travel, and the exhausting effort to defend their names. Routines that had anchored their survival were now constantly fractured by an unforeseen and inescapable ordeal. Economic ruin stalked the wake of social collapse. Colonial households operated on razor-thin margins. A lost planting season or neglected chores threatened immediate survival. When accusations crippled this continuous labor, The repercussions transcended reputation, endangering property, resources, and long-term security. This crisis was far more than an abstract conflict of faith. It was a devastating assault on the literal means of survival in a harsh, unforgiving environment. For the elderly, this upheaval was particularly corrosive. Decades of labor invested in home, land, and community were suddenly imperiled. Accusations threatened not just their present, but the integrity of their life's work. A legacy built over a lifetime faced scrutiny that was as unpredictable as it was profound, leaving the accused to confront the sudden fragility of everything they had secured. The young faced a different, yet equally crushing, burden. Their futures were unwritten, their identities still coalescing when the crisis intervened. Rather than defending established reputations, they grappled with the premature destruction of opportunity. These obstacles warped their social standing and prospects, dragging them into a maelstrom of events that extinguished their agency and clouded the horizons of their youth. Beyond the stark accounts of court records and public frenzy, a more poignant story emerges. The accused were not merely vessels for allegations. They were individuals striving to persist amid impossible pressure. They harbored the same concerns as any: family, livelihood, and the future, anchored by personal histories of honest work. By observing these quiet, domestic dimensions, the Salem narrative gains a chilling human scale. This crisis did not just unfold in public squares. It dismantled the sanctity of individual households, where ordinary people fought to endure as their world was systematically undone. As months waned, the accused were stripped of their former identities. The farmer, the widow, the churchgoer, all were reduced to a singular, damning epithet. Yet, beneath these labels, their complexities endured. They bore memories, ambitions, and histories that the machinery of accusation could never encapsulate. Time only widened this chasm. Each life comprised years of experience that official records ignored, harvests reaped, children nurtured, friendships cemented. Such moments vanished as public scrutiny fixated on allegations. History possesses a callous tendency to compress human existence into reductive narratives, masking the intimate, sprawling reality of those who lived it. The Salem crisis exposes the volatility of communal consensus. Few villagers anticipated such a swift, dark metamorphosis. Neighbors who occupied stable positions were suddenly cast into the furnace of suspicion. It was not the individuals who shifted, but the environment. Anxiety and evolving dogma warped the perception of those long known, transforming the familiar into the feared. A haunting sadness pervades this reality. The accused were not historical icons. They were living people navigating an encroaching void. Unaware of how posterity would examine their trauma, their concerns remained immediate: family, reputation, survival, and a desperate prayer for respite. Viewing Salem through the lives of the accused, rather than the lens of accusation, alters the narrative. It becomes a testament to ordinary souls redirected by inexorable forces. Behind every charge stood a unique history. To remember this is to witness the crisis not merely as a historical anomaly, but as a collective human tragedy defined by loss, uncertainty, and profound, irreversible change. But this suspicion didn't bloom in a vacuum. While the village whispered of spectral threats, the roots of the crisis were buried deep in the soil of broken promises and forgotten boundaries. Beyond the hysteria, there was a grinding, silent war over property and inheritance. A conflict where every stone wall was a battle line. The tragedy deepened because these long-festering, mundane grievances were weaponized by fear. turning neighbors who had shared a lifetime of labor into mortal enemies overnight. Across Salem Village, property manifested in varied forms. Fields stretched behind farmhouses, stone walls demarcated boundaries, and livestock served as vital capital. Families worked these parcels across generations, for survival hinged upon access to productive earth. The landscape itself was a testament to these arrangements. Every cleared pasture and fence represented labor, investment, and the deep-seated claims that dictated how residents navigated their communal existence. Beneath the physical facade of the village lay an acute awareness of status and economic standing. The disparity between those who held vast tracts and those who struggled with meager resources was known to all. Discourse concerning land, inheritance, and debt saturated daily life. These subjects carried profound emotional weight as they dictated security and future prospects. To live in Salem was to maneuver through a labyrinth of ambitions, obligations, and the harsh realities of material survival. As the crisis intensified, observers noted that accusations often surfaced within circles already defined by friction. Dormant disputes found new life. Ancient tensions regarding property lines, family legacies, and local influence emerged in tandem with the charges. While this does not imply a hidden motive in every instance, it introduces an unsettling possibility. Long smoldering conflicts were interacting with the hysteria sweeping through the village. Delving beneath the surface invites a more complex reflection. Human communities are seldom driven by a singular cause. Public catastrophes unfold within environments already saturated with unresolved grievances and competing interests. The people of Salem were not merely participants in a moral panic. They were neighbors managing property, protecting lineage, and negotiating social hierarchies. This perspective does not negate other theories. It reveals that beneath the visible drama of the trials, deeper, older currents had been reshaping village life long before the first accusation was cast. Land was the marrow of Salem's existence. To this farming society, property was more than a physical asset. It was the foundation of sustenance, security, and legacy. Generations of labor were etched into the soil, forests cleared, stones cleared, and fields sown. Ownership was a matter of profound emotional and economic gravity. A boundary dispute was never merely geographical. It threatened livelihoods, inheritance, and the fragile stability of a family's future. Property conflicts often metastasized slowly. Vague markers and shifting memories rendered old boundaries uncertain. Stone walls became subjects of interpretation between neighbors, while ambiguous records offered little clarity. As land was subdivided among heirs, ownership grew increasingly contentious. These friction points rarely erupted into immediate hostility, yet they festered, providing a fertile ground for long-simmering resentment. Inheritance introduced further volatility. The division of land, livestock, and tools among progeny forced agonizing decisions upon parents. Unequal distributions were inevitable, birthing disappointment and unresolved grievances. Such discord was not unique to Salem. Wherever land represented the zenith of wealth and security, it functioned as a catalyst for bitter, enduring family disputes. Historians scrutinizing the Salem trials have observed that many accusations followed the fault lines of existing property and inheritance feuds. While this reveals no simplistic cause and effect link, for human affairs are rarely so linear, it suggests that pre-existing animosities colored the perception of the accused. In a climate of pervasive fear, long-standing rivals were easily cast as villains, their history of conflict weaponized by suspicion. These patterns illuminate the intricate texture of the community. Salem was no gathering of strangers. It was a web of families tethered by deep-rooted rivalries, obligations, and competing interests. Economic discord was not a byproduct of the panic, it was a constituent element of daily life. By acknowledging these subterranean tensions, the Salem narrative gains depth. The crisis did not descend upon a vacuum. It ignited within a village already fractured by the weight of personal history and material competition, shaping the trajectory of the terror that followed. Beyond land ownership, Salem Village was fractured by shifts in influence and authority. Communities inherently forge in formal hierarchies. Elite families asserted dominance through wealth, longevity, and religious standing, while others occupied peripheral roles. These disparities, while not always overtly hostile, dictated the flow of power and communal perception long before the first accusation was cast. The village itself was in flux. Factions polarized over Salem's independence versus its fealty to external centers of authority. Debates over governance, taxation, and ecclesiastical leadership exposed deep ideological rifts. These were not merely administrative disputes. They were fundamental clashes over the village's identity, fostering an atmosphere where consensus remained a fleeting, fragile goal. Personal rivalries festered within this volatile climate. When interests diverge, friction is inevitable. While most disputes over commerce or status remain contained, times of crisis amplify their reach. Minor slights are reinterpreted through the lens of paranoia, rendering previously stable relationships vulnerable to collapse as fear strips away the veneer of civility. Historians have noted that many accusers and accused were already entrenched in long-standing local feuds. Certain families stood on opposite sides of property disputes, church politics, and leadership battles for years. While this does not offer a singular explanation, for many remained uninvolved in the trials, it prompts a necessary inquiry. How did these calcified tensions distort perceptions during the peak of collective panic? This perspective demands we view Salem not as a theater of mere victims and villains, but as a living, breathing community. Residents entered the crisis burdened by personal histories, memories of alliance, disappointment, and success. The accusations did not ignite in a vacuum. They struck a society already stratified by power and rivalry. The Salem story is less an abrupt explosion of hysteria and more the tragic intersection of extraordinary circumstances with the deep, unhealed fissures of village life. Economic strain served as a pervasive thread throughout Salem Village. Disparities in prosperity were stark. While some households thrived with vast acreage and ample livestock, others clung to marginal plots, their existence precarious. Such contrasts were woven into the fabric of daily life, influencing every interaction. Wealth, or the lack thereof, dictated not only one's standing but the very lens through which the community was navigated. Regional shifts further complicated these domestic realities. Salem was tethered to a volatile world of trade and expansion, where the fruits of progress were unevenly distributed. While some prospered, others faltered, struggling to adapt. As the equilibrium of wealth shifted, so too did notions of equity and success. Such transitions breed instability, coloring how neighbors interpreted the actions of their peers and those in power. Resentment rarely announces itself. In most settings, dissatisfaction festers in silence, confined to private discourse. Residents compared their lot against their neighbors, noting perceived imbalances in opportunity and fortune. While this remained a standard feature of social life in stable times, periods of acute stress transformed these frustrations into potent catalysts. Concerns once deemed peripheral began to dictate reactions to the unfolding crisis. Historians contend that economic stratification primed the social environment for the Salem accusations. This does not suggest that wealth was the sole driver, but rather that financial entanglement dictated trust and suspicion. Communities are forged from webs of debt, competition, and interest. During a catastrophe, these hidden mechanics become overt, influencing the alliances and antagonisms that define who is accused and who is spared. Contemplating these economic fissures offers a more holistic view of Salem. While fear and dogma were undeniable forces, they were anchored in the material struggle for survival. The accused were not merely spiritual actors. They were managers of farms, debtors, and providers. Their everyday realities shaped their perceptions in ways the courtroom never fully captured. By examining these material conditions, the Salem story deepens, revealing a community where spectral terror intersected with the visceral pressures of social and economic survival. Stepping back from the fervor of individual charges reveals a complex landscape. The Salem crisis did not ignite in a vacuum. It emerged from generations of communal interaction. Inheritance, economic struggle, religious friction, and personal rivalry were already woven into the daily fabric of the village long before fear became the ruling force. This reality compels historians to confront difficult questions. Were accusations purely the product of sincere conviction, or did latent grievances steer the hand of the accuser? Could paranoia and self-interest coexist? The evidence offers no simple resolution. Human motivation is rarely monolithic. An individual may act from genuine fervor while being unconsciously driven by deep-seated, unresolved tensions. The challenge is distinguishing cause from circumstance. Not every land dispute yielded an accusation, nor did every family feud descend into conflict. Many who faced profound hardship remained untouched by the trials. Salem cannot be distilled into a single narrative. Fear, greed, and piety are insufficient explanations in isolation. The crisis was a convergence of many volatile forces. This perspective elevates the ordinary realities beneath the extraordinary. While public hysteria captures history's gaze, the residents of Salem were fundamentally preoccupied with the mundane, protecting kin, managing resources, and securing a future. The terror did not stifle these practical concerns. It grew within a community already stratified by them. As we conclude, the debate remains unresolved. Was Salem a triumph of mass madness, or a calculated pursuit of private interest? The truth likely resides in the tension between these poles. Human motivation is rarely singular. Ambition, resentment, and belief often coalesce in the same breath. By tracing the fractures of property, power, and history, we gain a fuller view of Salem. The accusations may have struck like lightning, but the storm had been gathering for years. As these petty rivalries morphed into legal ammunition, the courtroom became an insatiable engine of destruction, leading inevitably to the silent, suffocating slopes of Gallows Hill. This wasn't just a place of execution. It was a mirror held up to a community that had completely lost its way. When the law stopped searching for truth and began simply clearing away problems, the human cost became visceral. The snap of a rope wasn't just an end for the condemned. It was the moment the social fabric of Salem was torn beyond repair. Gallows Hill stood removed from the pulse of village life, a silent sentinel over the fields and scattered homesteads. It possessed no monuments or grand structures. It was merely a rise in the natural terrain. From its slopes, one overlooked land long tilled by generations of families. Yet, during the dark months of the crisis, this unassuming elevation became the site of the colony's most somber reckoning. Approaching the site carried a weight distinct from the earlier proceedings. Conversations thinned into silence. The sounds of footsteps, wagon wheels, and distant murmurs demanded attention, heavy with the gravity of the unfolding events. Observers gathered, freighted with their own fears, doubts, and expectations. The atmosphere was thick with an uncertainty that resonated more deeply than any spoken word. As the shadow of executions and imprisonment lengthened, a chilling shift pervaded the colony. The crisis had escaped the confines of the courtroom. Its consequences were now visceral. Families grappled with loss, and communities adjusted to the void left by the condemned. News rippled outward, transforming a legal spectacle into a harrowing lived reality that touched hearts far beyond Salem. For many, this stage birthed questions that defied easy resolution. Previous certainties fractured into reflection. While some maintained the necessity of these acts, others wrestled with growing doubt. Though responses varied, a collective awareness dawned. Something profound and irreversible was transpiring. The narrative had shifted from mere allegations to the lasting legacy of fear, belief, and the irrevocable decisions that had permanently scarred the community. As the executions commenced, the emotional climate of Salem curdled. The era of abstract accusation and legal posturing had ended. The court's decrees were now claiming lives. Residents who once monitored the trials as distant spectators were forced to confront the grim reality. Kin, neighbor, and friend were being consigned to the gallows. This transition from allegation to execution fundamentally severed the community's sense of order. The condemned were a diverse collective, yet they were bound by the tightening grip of an inexorable system. Some maintained their innocence. Others were driven to confess to falsehoods under duress. Their individual reactions varied, colored by personal conviction and character, yet the machinery of justice had already rendered them mere ciphers. Despite the reduction of their lives into public symbols, their individual humanity remained, a silent reproach against the process that sought to extinguish them. Spectators held an equally precarious position. They gathered for varied motives: the pursuit of justice, idle curiosity, or a compulsion to witness history, however harrowing. Yet, the proximity to human suffering often fractured the observer's resolve. The spectacle of death, once witnessed directly, often replaced the certainty of the observer with sudden, uncomfortable reflection, sowing seeds of doubt where only confidence had stood. News of the gallows rippled outward, saturating neighboring towns. Information traveled via letters and word of mouth, each account molding the colony's collective psyche. Those who never stepped foot in Salem formed visceral opinions based on these reports. While some clung to the belief that the purge was a necessary defense against darkness, an undercurrent of profound unease began to stir, expanding the reach of the crisis far beyond the village borders. This malaise did not arrive as a singular shock, but as a slow, creeping realization. As Gallows Hill became the final destination for the accused, the human cost could no longer be ignored. Questions once considered abstract now carried the heavy weight of blood. As doubt and grief permeated the colony, they began to erode the foundations of fear that had fueled the trials, signaling the slow, agonizing start of the end. Imprisonment remained a pivotal, yet often overlooked, facet of the Salem crisis. Jails became holding pens for those awaiting the tribunal's decree. Within these bleak confines, a diverse cross-section of society, farmers, laborers, widows, and elders, was stripped of autonomy. Familiar rhythms of work and kin were discarded, replaced by the crushing monotony of time spent in the shadow of judicial uncertainty. For the captive, removal from the home had devastating consequences. Families left behind faced the dual burden of survival and the void left by their providers. Farms withered and responsibilities mounted, while financial pressures intensified. The tragedy of imprisonment rippled far beyond the cell, destabilizing households and fraying the social fabric of the entire region. The emotional toll of confinement was as varied as it was acute. While some prisoners clung to the hope of exoneration, others succumbed to the corrosive effects of fear, frustration, and physical exhaustion. Prolonged ambiguity fractured the psyche, rendering the future a blurred, unreachable horizon. In Salem, this state of suspension persisted, forcing many to endure agonizing stretches of time awaiting a verdict that would dictate their destiny. Outside, the community watched with bated breath. Families scrambled for word of their kin, while rumors of further arrests spread like wildfire. Each new prisoner reinforced the terrifying perception that the purge was infinite. For many, this escalation confirmed the existence of hidden threats. For others, it stoked deep anxiety regarding the ultimate limits of the court's reach. The swelling prison population fundamentally altered the colony's spirit. The initial certainty that justice would be swift and definitive crumbled under the weight of mounting accusations. The jails stood as stark, visible monuments to a crisis that refused to resolve. They existed in a liminal state, a grim bridge between accusation and finality. As months bled into one another, these prisoners bore silent witness to the trial's expanding reach, embodying the agonizing weight, the pervasive uncertainty, and the profound separation that defined this darkest chapter of colonial history. As autumn descended, the colony's emotional climate underwent a profound metamorphosis. The initial fervor of the trials, once fueled by urgent certainty, began to fracture. As the toll of executions mounted and prisons remained choked with captives, the grim reality of these fears became impossible to ignore. Skepticism emerged not because the underlying panic vanished, but because the human cost had grown too visible to deny. Private discourse became the crucible of this shift. Citizens debated the validity of accusations and the character of the condemned in the quiet spaces of homes and roadsides. Doubt seldom arrived as an overt rebellion. It seeped into the consciousness through quiet reflection, comparison, and the slow erosion of belief. Clergy members faced equally harrowing dilemmas. The spiritual paradigm once invoked to justify the purge now grappled with the weight of its own consequences. While some ministers remained steadfast, others questioned the legitimacy of the evidence and the severity of the methods. This widening rift in ecclesiastical opinion crippled the consensus that had once emboldened the court. The accused and their kin stood at the center of this gathering storm. Each vacancy at a family table, each untended field, served as a haunting reminder of the lives extinguished. These domestic disruptions accumulated, exerting a persistent influence that no legal decree could suppress. The distinction between the court's proceedings and the community's trauma had become irrevocably blurred. This pervasive unease marked the beginning of the end. Fear had initiated the trials, but it lacked the power to sustain them against the encroaching tide of reflection. Once uncertainty infiltrated the ranks of the elite and the commoner alike, the pillars of the court began to tremble. No single event triggered this transition. It was a slow, collective awakening. By the final days, the heavy silence of Gallows Hill held more than just grief. It carried the weight of an emerging, uncomfortable truth. By the final months of the Salem crisis, Gallows Hill transcended its physical form. It became a harrowing symbol of irreversible loss, etched into the collective memory. While it sat amidst the familiar geography of farm and church, it occupied a singular, dark space in the colony's emotional landscape. Its significance was not found in the terrain itself, but in the trauma woven into its slopes. Unease pervaded the region, though it manifested unevenly. Some remained steadfast in the necessity of the purge. Others were consumed by doubt regarding the evidence and the court's resolve. Between these poles lay a vast expanse of uncertainty. Communities do not pivot in unison. Perspectives shift through the slow, agonizing accumulation of experience and reflection. Salem was no exception. For families devastated by the gallows, the crisis left permanent voids. Loved ones, once integral to the rhythms of domestic life, were gone. While the seasons turned and daily labor persisted, those routines now served as haunting reminders of the missing. Grief manifested in these quiet details, in the empty chair at the table and the tasks left unfinished. The colony began to grapple with the broader implications of the purge. Residents measured their initial expectations against the brutal reality of the outcomes. While some clung to the belief that the darkness had been vanquished, others wrestled with the chilling possibility that justice had been sacrificed. Salem was not united in conclusion. It was adrift in a sea of conflicting interpretations and unresolved questions. As this chapter closes, the silence of Gallows Hill is heavy with memory. The hill overlooks the same countryside, yet the eyes that observe it are irrevocably changed. The people have seen fear codified into law and suspicion wielded as judgment. What remains is not merely a record of events, but an enduring emotional burden. Across Salem, a persistent malaise lingers in private thoughts, silently preparing the way for a long, painful reckoning with the truth. And now, centuries later, the hill stands quiet, yet the echoes of that collapse still vibrate beneath the surface of the modern landscape. We search for a single villain or a clean why, but the truth remains fractured, caught somewhere between religious fervor, social desperation, and the raw, human terror of losing one's place in the world. Centuries later, Salem's physical landscape remains more accessible than the motives that ignited its crisis. While roads, fields, and archives provide tangible traces, the inner lives, the fears, ambitions, and intentions of its people remain elusive. Historians sift through court documents and testimony for patterns, yet the deeper mystery persists. The records reveal what was said and done, yet they obscure the profound why behind those actions. Studying Salem today carries an inescapable atmosphere of ambiguity. A persuasive explanation may dissolve as new evidence emerges. Fear, belief, rivalry, and social pressure are all interwoven within the archive, lending the story a layered complexity. Rather than yielding a definitive answer, the surviving material presents a puzzle whose pieces defy a single, coherent assembly. Interpretations of Salem have evolved incessantly over time. Observers have characterized the trials as mass hysteria, social conflict, economic friction, religious fervor, or calculated manipulation. Each generation revisits these events with fresh questions, ensuring the mystery remains vibrant. Historical understanding is fluid. What appears compelling in one era may seem incomplete in the next, inviting perpetual reflection over finality. Perhaps this enduring uncertainty explains Salem's lasting grip on the collective imagination. Humans are drawn to events that resist simple resolution. The trials compel us to confront the nature of fear, power, and accountability, revealing how these forces bleed into one another. Salem offers no easy lesson. It leaves a haunting question. It challenges us to understand how ordinary lives, confined by their own perceptions, were pulled into a tragedy that defies explanation centuries after the silence fell. The prevailing interpretation of the Salem trials defines them as an eruption of mass hysteria. In this view, panic permeated the community like a contagion, where individual judgment dissolved into collective anxiety. A fear born in a single household traversed the village, through gossip, assembly, and public institution, until it dictated the actions of the entire population. This perspective highlights the experiences of the afflicted and the community's receptivity to them. The distress observed appeared authentic. The terror felt genuine. Witchcraft was not an alien concept, but a credible reality within their cultural framework. Fear did not manifest in a vacuum. It thrived upon existing religious tenets and a worldview that regarded supernatural threats as an absolute certainty. To the inhabitants of Salem, such anxieties were not mere delusions, but logical responses to a tangible peril. However, the theory of mass hysteria proves insufficient. If panic alone governed the trials, why were specific individuals targeted while others were spared? The patterns of accusation suggest that social legacies, familial friction, and local circumstance steered the suspicion. Panic may explain the credibility of these claims, but it fails to map how enmity traveled through precise networks of kin and neighbor. The crisis was far more intricate than a uniform wave of blind terror. We must also confront the sincerity of the participants. The historical record suggests that judges, clergy, and accusers acted with deep conviction. They were not merely agents of deception. They believed they were defending their community against an encroaching evil. If fear was the catalyst, it was inseparable from a profound, misplaced piety. They arrived at catastrophic conclusions while honestly attempting to uphold the order they understood. For these reasons, the label of mass hysteria remains incomplete. While it illuminates the emotional climate that rendered these accusations plausible, it leaves deeper layers untouched. Salem was not a monolith of collective madness. It was a community fractured by belief, social discord, and personal motivation. As we examine these events, the narrative shifts from a singular cause to a complex convergence of forces, each fueling the tragedy in its own way. Another perspective views the Salem trials through the prism of sincere belief. Here, participants were not mere vessels of panic, but were responding to a threat they deemed literal. 17th century New Englanders inhabited a world where the spiritual struggle between God and Satan was an immutable truth. Within this worldview, witchcraft was no metaphor. It was a tangible peril. Actions that appear irrational today were, by the cultural standards of the time, entirely logical. This lens demands a rigorous engagement with historical context. Modern sensibilities often obscure how deeply theology saturated daily life. Ministers warned of invisible foes. Households contemplated spiritual warfare, and the law codified supernatural offenses as legitimate crimes. Participants entered the crisis armed with assumptions that dictated their interpretation of events. Their conclusions may have been flawed, but error and malice are distinct, and the former does not necessitate the latter. Crucially, sincere belief often coexists with profound error. Humanity frequently acts with conviction while operating on incomplete or distorted information. Judges may have felt they were instruments of justice. Witnesses may have trusted their own distorted perceptions. These dynamics do not require deliberate deception. History is replete with communities that reached catastrophic ends while operating under the earnest belief that they were acting with righteousness. Salem may be one such tragedy. Yet, faith alone leaves critical questions unresolved. Salem's response was never monolithic. Dissenters existed, Individuals voiced doubts as the severity of the proceedings escalated. If faith were the sole driver, such fractures would be inexplicable. The presence of differing opinions reveals that even within a shared religious paradigm, individuals filtered events through personal experience and judgment, refusing to yield to identical conclusions. This interpretation adds a vital dimension to the mystery. It serves as a reminder that these historical actors were not merely victims of hysteria or pawns of manipulation. Many acted upon convictions they held to be profoundly meaningful. To comprehend these beliefs is not to endorse them, but to grasp how the crisis unfolded. Salem emerges not just as a study in panic, but as a testament to the immense power of faith. In a society where spiritual realities were as concrete as the physical world, earnest conviction likely fueled decisions whose repercussions spiraled far beyond anyone's intent. Another interpretation posits that Salem suffered a catastrophic social collapse. Communities are built on trust. When that foundation erodes, the mechanisms for resolving discord fail. Salem entered the crisis burdened by property disputes, economic instability, and political flux. While these pressures did not alone ignite the trials, they cultivated the soil in which suspicion took root. Viewed through this lens, the accusations reflect a community struggling to maintain order. Residents grappled with shifting leadership and competing familial interests. Such stresses are manageable in quiet times. Yet when fear enters the public discourse, underlying divisions become volatile. Existing rifts dictate who trusts whom, whose testimony carries weight, and which narratives gain dominance. Historians have noted that opportunism likely played a role in specific instances. This does not suggest every accusation was a cold, calculated strike, for human intent is rarely uniform. Yet, crises provide a shroud for individuals to settle ancient grudges or improve their social standing. A person entangled in a pre-existing dispute views the chaos through a different prism than the unaffected. Fear and self-interest are not mutually exclusive. They often converge in complex, shadow-filled ways. The specter of opportunism presents a challenge, as motives are rarely discernible centuries later. Archives document actions with clarity, but intentions remain obscured. We observe who accused whom and who gained from the outcome, yet determining the individual's true aim is speculative. Consequently, historians speak in probabilities rather than absolutes. The evidence reveals compelling patterns, though it seldom provides definitive proof. This analysis underscores the intricacy of human society. Salem was not driven solely by panic, faith, or malice, but by the intersection of these forces. Fear provided urgency, belief offered justification, social friction dictated the targets. These factors formed a landscape where accusations could flourish. Rather than settling for a single cause, the social breakdown theory demands a broader view. It suggests the tragedy ignited because the community's ordinary systems of cooperation buckled under extraordinary, unyielding strain. As the Salem narrative draws to a close, the impulse to seek a singular explanation persists. Human nature craves clarity, seeking to trace tragedy to a solitary source. Yet, the closer one peers into the abyss of Salem, the more such simplicity unravels. The evidence converges from myriad directions: fear, faith, social discord, economic desperation, and personal vendetta all remain permanently etched within the record. The trial's most haunting feature is the convergence of these forces. An individual could harbor genuine conviction while existing within a network of festering grievances. A judge could pursue righteousness through poisoned assumptions. An accuser could experience true terror while simultaneously navigating the currents of local rivalry. Motivations do not operate in isolation. They coalesce, forging outcomes that defy monolithic interpretation. Salem mirrors this inherent human complexity. The true inquiry is not whether the trials were hysteria or calculated malice, but whether such categories suffice. Accusations likely surfaced from a volatile fusion of honest belief and cold self-interest. History resists categorization because humanity resists it. The residents of Salem did not act from a singular script. They reacted to their circumstances through the flawed, fragmented mixture of conviction, ambition, and fear that defines the human condition. This intricacy explains why Salem remains a fixture of our fascination. The story serves as a perennial mirror for each passing era. Some discern a warning against panic, others a critique of ideology or power. Each perspective uncovers a facet of the truth, yet none exhausts the mystery. The enigma endures because every answer serves only to reveal further questions buried in the silence. Looking back across the village, at the gallows, the cells, and the fractured homes, Salem appears less like a puzzle with a fixed solution and more like a landscape of intersecting lives. The tragedy was forged by ordinary people confronting a world that felt perpetually dangerous. Their choices birthed consequences that still echo. Centuries later, the silence of Salem invites contemplation, not because the truth is hidden, but because it is fractured. Somewhere between hysteria and intent, between faith and ambition, lies a narrative that remains profoundly, irreducibly human. Salem doesn't offer us a closed chapter. It leaves us with a haunting question. If we look closely at our own communities, how many of our current solutions are just new versions of the trials, built on the same foundations of shadow and silence? The trials ended, the warrants dried, and the gallows were dismantled, but the darkness that allowed Salem to burn is never truly gone. It is simply waiting, right beneath the surface, for the next moment of fear to call it back into the light.